While my first gaming system was an Atari 2600, I have a lot of fond personal memories with the Nintendo Entertainment System. My experiences started on September 29th, 1987, when I got the NES as a birthday present that year. This box has stayed with me over the years, and this is the actual box that I grew up with, complete with the Super Mario Bros. Sticker from the Nintendo Fun Club. So yes, I've seen a lot of experiences and a lot of games with this little system. As with any top 10 list, nothing is set in stone. I'm sure you have your own personal nostalgic favorites, and if you'd like to share those with me in the comments below, great. I'd love to see what games inspired you back then. The Nintendo Entertainment System evoked a lot of nostalgic memories for me. Back during its popularity, it was almost inescapable. You could read magazines, you could watch it on TV, you could even eat it if you wanted to. And there's a lot of reasons why I hold affinity for certain games. Some of them were hanging out with friends, others were rentals over the weekend, some weren't even that necessarily great, but I still played them anyway. And this list isn't necessarily my top 10 favorite games or what I think are the top 10 best games. Whenever I think back on the Nintendo Entertainment System, these are the games that always stick with me. The list itself is not in any order. It's not chronologically, it's not by favorites. I just put 10 out there. Don't try to read too much into this, just look at them as 10 nostalgic games of mine. Number 1, The Legend of Zelda. When I initially got my Nintendo Entertainment System, I spent a lot of time playing Super Mario Bros. And cursing at ghosts and goblins. The Legend of Zelda caught my attention through an issue of the Nintendo Fun Club. At the time, that huge, sprawling world really caught my eye. I loved the haunting music when you first turned on the game, and I loved exploring that world and feeling like I could do everything instead of just simply progressing through levels. Everything about Zelda 1 felt great, and while I've been a huge avid fan of the series over the years, nothing ever quite came close to that experience until The Legend of Zelda Breath of the Wild. It reintroduced that sprawling, go anywhere, do anything element that attracted me to the first game, and made me love the series on a new level all over again. Number 2, Zelda 2, The Adventure of Link. I loved Zelda 1 so much, of course I had to get Zelda 2 at the time. The thing was, the game was incredibly hard to find back then, all due to Nintendo's chip shortage, as they called it.
Excuse me, princess.
While that may or may not have been true, it was an incredibly hard game to get, and it was one of the big games that I wanted for Christmas. Surprisingly and amazingly, my parents did find it, and while it was meant to be a Christmas gift for me, they knew I was going crazy to play this next installment, and decided to gift it to me early, whenever they found it. Number 3, Super Mario Bros. 2. Another one of the great 2 games from the Nintendo Entertainment System. This was equally in line with The Legend of Zelda for me. This one, however, came with a condition. I hadn't beaten the original Super Mario Bros. At the time, and my dad told me that in order for me to get another game based on the series, I'd have to go out and complete the first game. While I had struggled with it for months prior, I went out and beat it that exact day just to get this game. True to his word, my dad honored the deal. However, like Zelda 2, Super Mario Bros. 2 was incredibly hard to find for the 1988 Christmas season. He went all over the place, and as I remember from later stories, he was able to find a copy of the game at our local movie land. Take that, College Park Mall! Number 4, Castlevania 2, Simon's Quest. I'm sure you're sensing a trend here. While I didn't have to honor the I have to beat this first deal with this game, my copy of Castlevania kept freezing at the Grim Reaper on level 5. The vampire hunting adventure at Castlevania 2 was another high priority game of my Christmas list of 1988. Again, I loved the open world exploration and the fantastic music of Castlevania 2, but looking back on the game is nearly incomprehensible to play without a strategy guide or Nintendo Power. Between the broken English and the nonsensical clues, this was a hard game to play. Even revisiting the game on my NES Classic, I still find a lot of the clues just incomprehensible. I don't know how those testers thought a lot of this game made sense, but quality control was a lot lower back then, so another great personal nostalgic game, but definitely needed some tweaking. Number 5, Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. Finally, another game that doesn't end with a number 2. Although to get that experience I really wanted, I had to wait till that number 2 for the arcade version. The arcade version that came out from Konami was fantastic. 4 players simultaneous action, looked and sounded exactly like the cartoon, and endlessly fun to play. So when the Nintendo Entertainment System announced that they were getting a copy of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles for the system, I was ecstatic. And I still was, although it was a very, very different type of game. Very hard, a lot of elements didn't make it from the cartoon show, but still, everything was Turtlemania back then, and I spent many a night trying to complete that game. All I can say is, Shredder is super cheap. Number 6, Kid Icarus. While it may not sound like a major accomplishment, it was one of the first video games that my grandmother ever bought me as a reward for whatever it is that I did as a kid. But I loved Kid Icarus, and I still do. It was such a weird game. The different types of levels, the oddball enemies, again, another memorable score from the NES era. And good God, how frustrating were those eggplant wizards. While the game is so much easier these days, there's still always that tiniest hint of frustration whenever you run into the eggplant wizards. Number 7, Ducktails. I'm a big fan of old Disney video games, and this was one of the best and earliest examples of that. Another Christmas present selection. Of everything that I got that year, I locked myself into my room and played Ducktails all day long. It's still a great game. I still think it's one of the best examples of Capcom's game design. Number 8, Mega Man 2. Thought I ran out of 2 games, didn't you? Well, I didn't. Not for this one anyway. Adding a password system to Mega Man 2 really brought the game up to a new level. That's nothing to say for, yet again, memorable music, great level design, and colorful bosses. I'm not the greatest of Mega Man players, but I do remember the excitement of getting to that dragon sub-boss and finally defeating Dr. Wily once and for all. Number 9. Double Dragon. A fun game in its own right, Double Dragon had the distinction of actually being published in my hometown. My hometown of Corsicana was about 22 to 23,000 people at the time, and seeing video game ads present Corsicana as a video game publisher was exciting. I felt like we were finally known to the whole world. And it is a fun game despite its lack of 2-player. Double Dragon would also hold other personal nostalgia for me as I got older and eventually worked for that company, when it became Williams, then Midway. They were definitely great years, but I always have a little bit of childhood fondness whenever I see the old Trade West logo. Number 10, Super Mario Bros. 3. After the success of the first 2 games, there was no way you could escape the hype of Super Mario Bros. 3. I remember seeing it for the first time in GamePro, and the promise of all these great costumes as well as its featured role in The Wizard, which may as well have been an ad for that game. Super Mario Bros. 3 felt global, and their commercials reflected it as such. It's still a great example of game design and still one of the most ambitious Mario titles to date. While Super Mario 64 and Super Mario Odyssey later became my top contender for best Mario games, Super Mario 3 is still a great game that you can go back and pick up and play just as easily. Well, that's it for my top 10 nostalgic NES games. I could go back and talk all day about my personal favorite and the best of the system, but those were the ones that resonated the most with me when I was growing up.